Chapter 2. The thing he brought out of the equipment closet had buckles and straps and some nasty-looking hardware. I couldn't tell what it was exactly, though, because I was staring at it between my knees, upside down. Also, it was all jumbled up in Mr. Woolley's ape hands, and parts of it were dragging on the floor. Not good, I thought. Someone said a word that I won't repeat, except to say that it had an O before it and an exclamation point after it. Mr. Woolley didn't even bother to yell at the kid for saying it. In fact, he smiled a little bit, as if to say, "You got that right, pal." "Keep still, Mr. Burnham. This will only take a minute," Woolley said. Suddenly I was tangled in a web of heavy straps, and Mr. Woolley was clacking buckles and clicking hooks. When it stopped, there were a few seconds of dead silence. Then the snickering began. "Woof," someone said. It took me a moment to realize what had happened. I saw Mr. Woolley step in front of me and then back up. He was holding a long strap. He gave it a quick yank, and I felt a tug from the straps that were secured around my torso. He had put me in a halter, like a dog, and he was holding my leash. "Okay, Burnham, since you can't manage to do a simple somersault on your own, I'll have to help you do one." For the next 10 minutes I was yanked across the mat and forced to flop around in the most degrading way. I caught fleeting glimpses of my classmates' faces as they tumbled around. Most of them were pink with hysteria. And of course there were comments. They didn't even bother to lower their voices, knowing instinctively that Mr. Woolley wouldn't care. "Time to cut back on the puppy chow, Owen." "That's the fattest poodle I've ever seen," and so on. It was Justin Esposito who bothered me the most. His hand was pressed against his mouth and his eyes were wide. It was exactly like one of those faces you see in horror movies, where the Boy Scout wakes up to see a man with no nose and 10-inch iron claws tearing a hole in his pup tent. I was that vision of horror for Justin Esposito. That's how bad it all looked. My friend Nima told me about these Tibetan monks who built a stone wall on a cliff by levitating huge rocks 800 feet into the air. During moments like these, I sort of lift out of my body, rising up out of the situation like a levitating rock. I'm there, but I'm not there. It's my way of dealing. But Justin's face was holding me down, making me feel the full awfulness of what was happening. "There now," Mr. Woolley dropped the leash suddenly. "I think that'd help you get the hang of things." He had a funny look on his face, as though he had suddenly become a little scared about what he had just done. "Unbuckle him, Mr. Esposito," Mr. Woolley ordered angrily, just like the harness had been Justin's idea. Justin rushed over and fumbled with the hooks while I sat back on my haunches, my face burning, my eyes focused on an incident on the mat where my head had been. It was slowly filling out, erasing what had just happened. When Justin undid the final buckle, he jumped away from me. The other kids were looking at me kind of funny, too. They seemed nervous, like Mr. Woolley. I think they expected me to snap. It was a strange sensation. For a moment I felt really powerful. I felt large, but not in a fat way. The spotlight was on me. I smiled. First at all the kids, and then at Mr. Woolley. They didn't know what to do. They all stared at their sneakers in shame, including Mr. Woolley. "That's not true. That's not what I did. That's what Nemo would have done. Here's what I did. Turned red as shrimp cocktail sauce, lost all the control of the muscles in my face, cried, no sobbed, no bawled like a 3-year-old in Walmart." Mr. Woolley looked scared and also disgusted. Most of the other kids just looked disgusted. I had the opportunity to snap, to have a volcanic eruption of pure outrage, but I had botched it. Mr. Woolley told me to go to the locker room and collect myself. As I passed Andre, he slapped the back of my neck. I think it was meant to be reassuring, but then again he may have just taken the opportunity to slap me. By the time lunch rolled around, I had collected myself, though my eyes were still swollen. I looked around the lunchroom for Izzy Shank, the kid I always sit with. He wasn't at our usual table. It didn't take a genius to see why. Mason Ragg was sitting there, all by himself, of course, since no one would dare to sit near him. More about Mason Ragg later. When I sat down by Izzy, he looked at me carefully, not noting the swelling eyes, I'm sure. He didn't ask me about it, though. That's the one reason I like Izzy. He doesn't make a big deal about things. He's the least dramatic person I know. I opened my lunch sack and pulled out my shredded tofu sandwich. There's not enough mayo in New York City to make that taste better than it sounds, and my bottle of pomegranate green tea. That was when I noticed the recycled shower curtain eco container was empty. It was even sealed back up, and those recycled containers are tricky to seal. They don't snap closed nice and easy like Tupperware. You really have to work at it. Anyway, the Oreos were gone. I stared and stared into the empty sealed container and shook the sad black crumbs that were lying at the bottom. I couldn't believe it. I can't believe it, I said. What? Izzy said. Izzy's voice is deep as a 40-year-old man's talking into a bullhorn, by the way. I think it's because of some glandular condition. I forgot what it's called, but he's basically huge, 6'5" and still growing. Someone stole my Oreos! I shoved the empty container at him and he took it in his hands, which happened to be the size of Jeremy's whole face. He gazed into the cloudy-looking container like he was staring into a crystal ball. In a way he was. My future lay in that empty container. They sealed the container back up, he said. I know! I was momentarily pleased that Izzy had noticed too. That little fact had struck me as totally perverse. Who is so cool and collected while stealing that they take time to seal up a difficult-to-seal eco-container back up? I looked around the lunchroom. Everyone looked suspicious, but no one was eating any Oreos as far as I could see. I watched carefully all through lunch. Izzy did too. Nothing. Check teeth, I hissed at him. We paced through the lunchroom, trying to look inconspicuous as we searched for someone with black stuff caught between their teeth. Honestly, I didn't know what we would have done if we found someone who did. It would be hard to prove that it came from Oreos rather than a ho-ho or something like that. Besides which, neither Izzy nor I are what you would call confrontational. Yes, Izzy is the biggest person in the school, but he's more of a pacifist than I am. And I'm only a pacifist because I'm terrified to get hurt. My sister, Jeremy, on the other hand, is always happy to pummel someone, especially if it's on my behalf. But Jeremy's grade has lunch before ours, so she wasn't around. My eyes fell on Mason Ragg, who was sitting at our usual table. He was placed in my class a week and a half ago. He'd been transferred from one of the other public schools. The word around school was that he had been transferred because he was unmanageable. That was another thing about the Orthodoxy school. They prided themselves on enrolling kids who didn't fit in at mainstream schools, including bona fide psychopaths like Mason Ragg. People said that he carried a switchblade knife in his sock. They said in his last school he had tried to strangle one of the girls in his class with Molly Wildchild necklace. You've probably seen the commercials for the junk. But if you haven't, it's this lavender-haired cartoon character that girls just go insane over. Not Jeremy, though, of course. The girl's older brother threw an M80 firecracker at Mason's face in retaliation. That was the story that went around school anyway. It was certainly possible. One whole side of his face was badly scarred. The skin was all bumpy and puckered, twisting up at the right side of his lips so that he looked like he was always sneering. He resembled an evil character out of a comic book. No kidding. And he always looked like he was trying to catch someone staring at him. Now he had. You know why? Because sitting on the table in front of him, stacked in a tidy little column, were 3 Oreo cookies. What are you staring at? He asked in a quiet voice. Cool cigar, I said. I really did. I do stuff like that when I'm nervous and can't think of what to say. I can't repeat his response, though. Use your imagination. You won't be wrong. Sorry, I said. That's correct. You heard me. I said sorry to the kid who stole my moment of bliss. You might have, too. Did I mention that Mason's right eye is a spooky milky blue, while his left one is brown? Too bad about the cookies, man, Izzy said after the period buzzer sounded and we had to go our separate ways. But no use entangling with Rag. He has a buck knife strapped to his arm. I heard it was a switchblade in his sock, I said. Does it matter? I mean, really? No. Hey, keep the faith. Izzy could say things like that, which might sound sort of cool if a non-giant had said them. But when he said them, it sounded kind of like one of those deep, garbled voices you hear in the subway speaker system, you know. 96th Street and Broadway, watch the closing doors, keep the faith. Thanks, Izzy. He squeezed my shoulder. It hurt. I didn't say ow, though, because he was only trying to be nice, and he couldn't help being insanely strong. Chapter 3. After school, I waited for Jeremy, and we walked home together, like we always do. I was in a lousy mood, but she was in a very good one. Suspiciously good. She strode along beside me with a small, secretive smile. What? I said. Nothing. Just a gob thing, that's all. By the way, I think there's a girl in my class who's a gob. I said. Who? Oh, Rachel somebody or other, you mean? Jeremy said. Rachel Lowry. Now, she looks like a gob, but she's not. Anyway, all the gobs are in 6th grade and not 7th. Hey, do people ever get expelled from our school? Why? I looked at her. She was still smiling a small, secretive smile. I didn't like it. What did you do What did you do? Is it something about GWAB? It's not GWAB, actually. It's GWAB. Girls Who Are Boys. Jeremy joined the club 2 weeks ago. There are 7 other girls in the club, and they've all changed their names to boys' names. They only wear boys' clothes, and they cut their hair in boys' haircuts. Jeremy didn't cut her hair. I don't know how she got away with it, since GWAB is pretty strict. Jeremy is stubborn, though. Her hair is bright red, straight as a ruler, reaches past her last vertebra in her spine. Jeremy used to hate it when she was younger because someone in her class told her that redheads were freaks of nature. But our mother told her that redheads were genetically more courageous than other people and that she should always wear her hair long, like a warrior's badge of honor. I don't think there is any biological accuracy to that statement, by the way. In any case, Jeremy never cut her hair, except for a trim at the barbershop every now and then. We all signed our boy names on our math test, she said. But how will Mr. Shackley know who you are? He won't. He'll have to ask. Then we will stand up in the class and publicly declare that we are to be called by our boy names from now on. He won't do it, you know, I said. Mr. Shackley is one of the tougher teachers at our school. He'll have to, Jeremy said simply. We won't answer him if he calls us by our girl names. I groaned. There was going to be trouble. The GWAB members were pretty intense. I've seen them around, looking very determined. They recruited Jeremy after they saw her get in a fight with a boy in her class. They said she had the right stuff, and she agreed to join. I don't think she did it because she actually wants to be a boy. I think she did it because she was just lonely. Things have been a little topsy-turvy for us these past 2 years. New school, new apartment, new life. I think Jeremy was just glad to have some friends again. Plus, she loves a good fight, and so do most of the GWAB members. It was a perfect fit, really. Hey, Flapjack. Jeremy and I both turned around to see Andre Bertoni jogging up to us. We occasionally meet him as we're walking to or from school since he lives right across the street from us, in this fancy apartment building called the Fuji Towers. More about Fuji Towers later. Andre was wearing his big screen smile. I heard Jeremy swallow hard. Really, I heard it. She has a huge crush on Andre. She's a sensible kid in every other way. How are you doing, man? Andre said when he cut up to us. Hey, Caitlin. She's not Caitlin anymore, I told him. She's changed her name to Jeremy. But that's a boy's name, he said, his smile now looking confused. That's right, I said. He looked over at Jeremy, and her face became roughly the same color as her hair. You know what I would do if I were you, Flapjack? He said, looking away from Jeremy. Kill yourself, I thought. But I said, I have no idea, Andre. I'd sue, he said confidently. Sue who? I asked. The school, Andre said, because of what Mr. Woolley did to you. What did he do? Jeremy's ears pricked up at this. She was always looking out for unfair things that people had done to other people, especially if it involved me. Nothing, I said. What did he do, Owen? What did he do to Owen? She addressed this to Andre, completely forgetting herself and yanking Andre's jacket sleeve. Andre looked a bit surprised at himself. He smoothed down at the material of his jacket. It was probably some fancy European jacket that his father had brought back from some super suave country. You put him in a dog harness and forced him to roll around on the floor, Andre said. It was nothing, I insisted. Jeremy's mouth gawped open. For a moment I thought she was about to bellow. She's a little bit like a superhero with no superhero talents. She despises bullies and loves underdogs, much like the classic superhero. But she's thin as a coat hanger and on the shortish side. And all she can do is punch reasonably hard with her bony knuckles. No jet-propelled flying, no invisibility skills. I'll pulverize him, she said in this quiet voice. It was impressive. Even Andre gave her his full attention for about 7 seconds before he turned back to me. Tell your mother to call my dad. He might even be willing to take the case himself. Then he jogged on, leaving me with the dismal, fleeting image of Mom sitting in Mr. Bertoni's cushy leather chair office, it had to be leather, discussing how I'd been trussed up in a dog harness. How could Willie treat you like that? Jeremy blurted. You! She had this idea about me. She thinks I'm a better person than I actually am. Nicer, funnier, smarter. I mean, I am smart, but she thinks I'm a genius, which I am not. Not quite. I missed the genius rank by 1 point. What she didn't know was that people were always treating me like Mr. Woolley had, or thereabouts. I mean, I do think she understood I wasn't exactly popular, but 6th and 7th graders live in totally different universes. She didn't know that I had become an official bully magnet, the punchline of every joke, that people made fart noises when I walked by and murmured things like fatty, fatty, ding dong. She didn't know that I wanted to keep it that way. Just forget it, I said. It was no big deal. But the anger was leaving her face and being replaced by a look of despair. Oh, Owen, what a world. They were gut-squeezing words. It made me think of other stuff besides Mr. Woolley and stolen Oreo cookies. I glanced at Jeremy. She was frowning down at the pavement. I worried she might be thinking of the very same stuff. Hey, I said, trying to make my voice sound jolly. How about we go to the demo site on 93rd Street? All right, I guess. She didn't sound enthusiastic, but once we arrived at the tall sheets of plywood that fenced off the demolition area, she started to perk up a little. The week before, Jeremy and I had found a loose board on the one corner. Security around these places is shockingly slack. Every so often I consider writing the mayor of New York and letting them know what a shoddy job the demo crews are doing and that little kids could get really hurt, but that probably wouldn't be in our best interest. We slipped inside. The site was a mess of rubble, of course. The tenement had a blazing fire a few weeks before and had burned down part way. The demolition crew knocked the rest of it down a little while after. There were some real gems scattered around. To date, we had scavenged the motors from a washing machine, a heap of bicycle chains, an old laptop that works some of the time, half of a pair of handcuffs, no keys, and a really beautiful slab of marble. One time we ran into a young guy who was also hunting there. He looked totally normal, nice button-down shirt and jeans. He said he liked to furnish his apartment with recycled items. I thought that was a very polite way of saying he was a garbage picker, just like us. He was a pretty friendly guy, and he did give us some advice about new demo sites and a warning about metal scavengers. He said that we should watch out for them. They were really protective of their sites because they made a living out of collecting stuff like copper pipes, brass valves, and aluminum heating coils, and selling it to scrap metal dealers. He said they weren't beyond using violence if they caught you on their sites. That scared the heck out of me, but it made Jeremy even more eager to go scavenging. She liked anything that might pose bodily danger. Back home, we dumped our haul in my room. Mom wasn't home yet. She never gets home before 6:30, and Honey's back teeth were swimming. She had to pee so badly. So the first thing I did was take her for a walk. Honey is a pit bull that Mom found in front of our apartment building one evening. We named her Honey so she wouldn't seem quite so scary to people, but it never really worked. In the elevator, people press themselves up against the opposite wall and give her the evil eye. She doesn't seem to care. She wags her tail at them anyway. She's so easygoing that she never fusses when I put the crap catcher on her. It's one of my first inventions. Fairly primitive. A strap around the waist and a loop fitted under her butt, made of wire, slipped into a sleeve of plastic. Attached to the loop is a tiny motor, scavenged from an electric shaver I found on the demo site on 77th Street. What you do is you fasten a plastic bag around the loop with a rubber band and walk your dog. When she does her thing, you push one button on the handheld remote and the band clinches together quickly. The rubber band pings off the loop and the plastic bag falls to the ground, ready for you to pick up and put into the garbage can. It works beautifully. You wouldn't believe how many people stop me in the street and ask where they can buy one. The only weak spot is that the rubber band pinging it off somewhere. After I walked Honey, I opened the fridge and found a plate on the bottom shelf with an apple, a slim slice of cheese, and a handful of zucchini sticks. My afternoon snack. I devoured it in 2 minutes flat. It made zero impact on the empty hole in my stomach, where the 3 Oreos should have been. I knew where the package of Oreos was kept, the cabinet above the refrigerator. My mom calls it the stop and think cabinet. In order to reach it, you have to find the phone book and the dictionary, drag over a chair, put the phone book on the chair, the dictionary on top of the phone book, and then balance yourself on top of the phone book and the dictionary in order to reach the shelf. All that dragging and balancing and potentially falling gives you time to stop and think if what's in the cabinet is really worth the trouble. It was. But here's the thing. Let's say I did take a few unauthorized Oreos. There was a chance Mom wouldn't notice they were missing. But there was also a chance she would. And if she did, she would get mad. She wouldn't yell or anything like that. What she'd do was worse. She'd look me in the eye and tell me that I had broken my promise to her. Pal. That's like getting the worst sucker punch right in the gut. If you don't believe me, you don't know Mom. 3 more hours till dinner. I went to my room with a sickish rumbling in my stomach. In the center of the room was a tripod on which stood an 18-inch satellite dish. On the floor was a black receiver, an old television set, a mass of wire coils, connectors, and various hardware. Her name is Nemesis. I've been researching and building Nemesis for a year and a half. She's nearly finished. I'm not going to tell you what she will do once she's complete. You don't know me well enough yet. You probably think you do. Everyone thinks they know the fat kid. We're so obvious. Our embarrassing secret is out there for everyone to see, spilling over our belts, flapping under our chins, stretching the seams of our jeans. That doesn't mean we don't have other secrets that you can't see. I pulled out the metal toolbox from under my bed and opened it. As always, I took a moment to admire the sight. Neatly organized nuts, bolts, and screws in the top shelf, tiny to medium-sized wire clippers and an X-Facto knife in the middle, and needle-nose pliers, wire strippers, and screwdrivers in the bottom shelf, arranged according to size, along with bottles of oil and grease and an ancient soldering iron. Thomas Edison once said, "To invent, you need a good imagination and a pile of junk." I definitely had the junk. There was also a carton in my closet full of old motors from electric fans, automatic jewelry cleaners, and toy cars all the way up to a boat's outboard motor, tangles of wires, spare parts from the auto salvage, an elevator cable, and much more. I sat down and started to work on Nemesis. When an hour flew by, I began to realize something alarming. I could try her now. After a year and a half of researching and scavenging and tinkering, she was ready for a dry run. It made me feel squirrely in my stomach, but maybe I was just hungry. I switched her on, turned the TV to channel 37, a station which we don't get on our regular television. Then I waited. Nothing happened. I adjusted the angle of the satellite dish a dozen times. Nothing. 2 more hours flew by. There was a quick knock on my door, and Mom popped her head in. I'll give you the description of Mom's head. She has heavy-lidded green eyes without many eyelashes, which is unfortunately very apparent due to her thick glasses. The glasses have pink frames. Her nose is just a nose, nothing remarkable there. Her lips chap pretty easily. Her hair is blonde and thin, and she often wears it in a short ponytail. You wouldn't notice her in a crowd. Or if you did, you might mistake her for the woman who makes appointments for you at the orthodontist's office. It's her voice that is unusual. It's velvety. It brushes against your eardrums and slips down your ear canal, and it makes you feel like everything will turn out okay, no matter how bad things look in the moment. Which is a good thing, since Mom is a 9/11 dispatcher for the NYC Police Department. Every year she gets Christmas cards from people who have spoken to her on the 911 line thanking her. They address the letters to the woman with the beautiful voice, or the lady who sounds like an angel. The guy who distributes the mail always knows who they mean and drops the cards on Mom's desk. "What's cooking, good lookin'?" she asked. "Nothing much," I answered a little glumly. "How's the radio thingy coming?" She thinks Nemesis is a satellite radio. Well, she thinks that because I told her that. It was a lie. I also lied about where I got the parts. I told her I have a friend whose father owns a junk shop. She would be furious if she knew Jeremy and I were crashing demo sites. It needs work. "It looks fine to me," she said. "Very scientific." "It doesn't matter how it looks. It has to work. And so far it doesn't." I try to be patient with her. "How was school?" "Same old. How was work?" "Same old." We were both lying, of course. There was no way I was going to tell her how school was. It was too gruesome. And there was no way she was going to tell me how work was. Again, too gruesome. Although lately I think Jeremy gives her more anxiety than the stuff she hears at her job. For instance, this was the conversation at dinner. "How was the math test, Caitlin?" Mom asked Jeremy. "It was fine, Zelda," Jeremy said. They have this thing. Mom refuses to call her Jeremy. She thinks it's ridiculous. So Jeremy refuses to call her Mom and uses her real name instead. It drives them both insane. I try to stay out of it, though. "You know, Owen," Mom said, "you look thinner." I rolled my eyes. "No, really," she said. "I see a difference. Around your face, I think." "Watch, I'll probably only lose weight on my face," I said. "Then I'll have a tiny pinhead attached to a fat body." "Doesn't work that way, Owen." "He's being sarcastic, Zelda," Jeremy said. "Besides," Mom said, attempting to ignore her, "you were thin once. I've seen the pictures. You were very well proportioned." "Can we not talk about this?" I said. Mom frowned and bit her lip. Then she said, "Oh, geez, sorry, honey, of course." She misunderstood. She thought it was the past I didn't want to talk about. Actually, it was the fact that I had once been skinny. That embarrassed me. I felt like I had failed some tests along the way. Like I had started out with a fine biological potential, and through my own weakness had wrecked it. I still had a bag of my old clothes from 2 years ago sitting in the back of my closet. Normal-size clothes. I should have dumped them, but I didn't want to. They reminded me of what I once was. The stupid thing though, I couldn't look at them either, because they reminded me of what I once was. Consequently, they just sat there, taking up too much space, much like myself. After dinner, I flew through my homework, which was laughable, and took the elevator downstairs to apartment 5A. I pressed the buzzer, and in a minute, the door was opened by a small, wiry man with the skin color of a bit of honey candy bar. This is Nima. He's Tibetan, but he grew up in India and only came to New York a few months ago. Tashi Delhi, he mouthed to me as he held the phone to his ear, and he nodded for me to come in. It was the dinkiest apartment you could imagine. One little room that served as a kitchen slash dining room slash living room slash bedroom. You'd think that would be depressing, but it wasn't. In fact, it was a really cheerful place, with bright wall hangings and with colorful cloths draped over the couch and bed, which was just a thin mattress tucked into the corner of a room. On top of the television set were framed pictures of a very pretty woman. In one picture, she wore a long blue dress with striped apron hanging down from her waist. In another, she wore jeans and a white tank top. That was his new wife, Pima. I tried not to stare too much at her. He had a little shrine on the end table in the corner, which was covered with red, blue, and yellow cloth. On it was a statue of Buddha and a framed picture of the Dalai Lama, who is the leader of Tibet. Also, there were 7 silver bowls filled with water, a bell, candles, and depending on the day, a bunch of flowers or some pieces of fruit, which are offerings to Buddha. Buddha doesn't eat them, of course. It's a Santa and milk and the cookies kind of thing, without the presents or the ho-ho-ho. Although the Buddha definitely has that jolly fat man look about him. I sat down on the couch and waited for Nima to finish his call. He was speaking Tibetan, but I was pretty sure he was talking to Pima, who was still living in India, because he barely said anything, and when he did talk, he kept being cut off mid-sentence. He didn't get mad, though. It's really hard to not ruffle Nima. When he hung up, he smiled at me. She have a hot temper, he said. He's secretly proud of that, I think, even though I'm under the impression that a hot temper is un-Buddhist. What's she mad about? Oh, I went to a party at her cousin's house in Brooklyn last week. Family party, such a thing. She heard I was flirting with her cousin. Were you? Actually, it's possible. He smiled. His left front tooth is covered with gold, which makes him look like a very good-natured pirate. You could see how he might flirt with some girl without really trying. He's youngish, so maybe 21 or 22, something like that, and I bet the girls would like him. He always looks like he's about to wink at you, though I've never seen him actually wink. Nima made me some sweet tea and opened up the Tupperware container full of cold momos. Momos are Tibetan dumplings filled with meat and vegetables and garlic and other things. They are so good you could cry. Nima makes them by hand and sells them from a cart that he parks in front of the Museum of Natural History. We used to bump into each other in the elevator when I was walking Honey and he was coming back home from work. He was fascinated by the crap catcher, and I was fascinated by the smell coming from his bag of leftover momos. It was a match made in heaven. Today, as always, he asked me how Nemesis was coming along. Fine, still needs some work, I said. He didn't know what Nemesis would do when it was finished. He once asked, back when I first met him. If I told you, you wouldn't believe me, I said. Perhaps not, he replied. That was that. He'd never asked again. But he liked hearing about it. He told me that when the Dalai Lama was a kid, he used to be able to fix movie projectors and clocks and cars, and that if the Dalai Lama hadn't been the Dalai Lama, he would have actually been an engineer. I guess that puts me in pretty good company. I didn't tell Nima about the whole thing with Mr. Woolley. It was just too humiliating. I did tell him about the missing Oreo cookies and Mason, though. You got to see this kid. He's pure evil, I said. Oh no, are you going to tell me something Buddhist? I said warily. You don't want to hear? He asked, smiling. Not really, but go ahead. This boy Mason, is he your enemy? Well, he's stealing from me, so yeah, it's safe to see he's my enemy. Good, Nima said. How is that good? I asked. Because enemies are very helpful. Better in some ways than friends. If you stay calm when your enemy harms you, you become a much stronger type person. I must have looked unimpressed because he added, also it's good for your karma. You do good thing happens for you. You do bad thing, he shook his head gravely, then he smiled. It's hard for Nima to stay too serious. Fine, I said, so I stay calm and think nice Buddhist thoughts about Mason. Then tomorrow he goes pawing through my lunch and takes my cookies again. Possibly you could leave a note, Nima said. A note? My voice grew shrill. And what do you suggest I say? You could say, kindly not to take my cookies. Ha! Sometimes Nima was so unrealistic. I think it came from him always assuming that people were sensible. Or maybe, actually, he glanced at me as though he were about to suggest something he thought he shouldn't. What? I asked. You can make a thing, like your crap catcher, only a teeth catcher. He had trouble with the TH sound, so it took me a moment to realize that he meant thief catcher. I blinked. I could, I said, just to prevent him from doing so again, not harming him, of course. Of course not. I was liking the idea more and more with each passing minute. Nima, on the other hand, looked more and more apprehensive. He was probably wondering if his suggestion was going to bring on some bad karma for me, or something like that. But maybe you give this kid another chance. Maybe it was such kind of one-time mischief, like flirting with your wife's cousin. Okay, I said. I'll wait till tomorrow. I'll give him another chance. We'll see if it happens again.